Yes, good afternoon and welcome to the Health and Safety Committee meeting. And we have a quorum with Ms. Bowers and myself, and Mr. Messers left a message with Ms. Davis that he's on his way. So we can get started with Mr. Glover and Mr. Kearney with our legislative report.
Eric, do you want to kick it off?
Okay, yeah, sure. Thank you very much for having us here. And the way that the report is organized this month, we wanted to let you know we had a meeting with 4 members of the House of Representatives, Representative Denson, Ingram, Kelly, and Miranda regarding legislative concerns and upcoming State House issues. That occurred on Friday. Also, this week, as you know, we're going to have a meeting with Senator Blessing on March 18th. That's a joint meeting between this committee and the Finance Committee. We've included a few articles. The first attachment is the budget, and so the budget is going on right now, so you can click that link for the budget. And then just a couple of articles that might be of interest. Wanted to include Senate leadership because there was a change. Cecil Thomas stepped down as Assistant Minority Leader in the Senate, and he was replaced by Nikki Antonio. And then Tina moved up to Minority Whip, and then Herschel Craig from Columbus became the Assistant Minority Whip. All the other leadership is the same. Just note that the only local person that we have is Bill Seitz, who is Majority Floor Leader in the House. And then the committee meetings are listed. And thankfully, Senator Blessing is Vice Chair of the Senate Primary and Secondary Education Committee. So that's good for us. There are a few bills that are of note that we discussed. House Bill 34, requiring the transmittal of records within 5 days. That was by former school board member Ingram, so we want to imagine be supportive of that. Also, we discussed 126 about contesting property values. And we discussed House Bill 67, which is it's in the Senate right now, but it exempts public and charter schools from administering the state assessment. And so that's a bill that we're watching closely. George has been up at the State House, and I know he's got some really good information.
Thanks, Eric. And can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah, I have a question for Eric. And House Bill 67, is that only for the 2021 school year, or is that indefinitely?
It's for the present school year.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm going to double check that. The board member, give me 1 second, but as George talks, I'll make sure that I'm right about that, but that's my understanding. Give me 1 second.
Okay, thank you.
Can everybody hear me okay?
I can, yes.
Just to pick up on that bill, House Bill 67, that bill is what we like to call is on a fast track in the Ohio General Assembly. It recently passed the Ohio House with only 1 no vote. Going through a very expedited Senate hearing process and Senate Education Committee as well. There's every expectation that it will pass quickly. 1 or 2 variations to that bill will be more than likely the Senate will add what they call an emergency clause to make it effective immediately upon the signature of the governor. The House version does not have an emergency clause attached to it. The expectation is the Senate will attach one. They did exempt one issue, one course, that being American history, that is not included in the bill. So just to be aware of that as well. And Eric, on your question, I believe it is applicable to this school year, but I'm not sure about future school years as well. But nevertheless, it's a hot item in the General Assembly. It will be enacted quickly.
Okay.
Any further questions on that bill?
Yes, Ms. Ballard.
Can you explain the exempt of the American history?
I'm sorry, what?
Did you say American history was exempt?
No, I'm sorry, they did not exempt that.
Okay. Can you talk more about what that would mean?
Well, when asked, the thought was that the Senate not like that, and perhaps it was so important to the political process that they should keep that in there. Kind of a weak answer, but that's the best response I heard. Eric, unless you heard something more than that.
No, I did not. And that question was asked specifically of the state representative. So to jump in and to answer the question on 67, here's some language to explain it. For the 2020, 2021 through 2023, 2024 school years, it permits a student to use the final course grade in a course associated with an end-of-year exam in lieu of a score that examination to satisfy conditions for a high school diploma. So, but the testing window, the bill goes to the end-of-year course examinations for 2021. Do you see what I mean? So starting this year through 2023, 24, you can use your final coursework as the final exam to say that you met the requirements for a high school diploma.
Instead of the assessment?
Instead of, yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, but it's the end of course exams, and the end of course exams are state exams, right?
Yes.
It's not the
Eric,
final that the teacher gives. It's the end of course, like the Algebra 2 end of course exam that's approved by ODE, right?
Well, what they're saying is, if the hold on 1 second. Let me get it right here. So that public schools are exempt from administering the state-required American history exam, end of course exam for the 2020-2021 school year. Okay? And then it says that it requires the Department of Education or any entity with which the department contracts for the scoring of the third grade English language arts assessment to send to each school district a list of scores for that assessment by June 28th, 2021. And then it says that for high school graduation, the use of the final course exam in a course can be used in lieu of that end of course state exam. Okay, and then it provides some leeway for public schools and the principal in consultation with teachers and counselors to determine whether a student has successfully completed the high school curriculum or individualized education program. So it's loosening, I guess you would say loosening, the standards for the graduation requirement.
Yeah, I got it.
Because of COVID, obviously.
Right.
Eric, one additional point. One of the catalysts, one of the reasons to simulate all this was that the U.S. Department of Education recently released a guidance stating that the federal government will give states flexibility on testing, but would not make available any blanket waivers. I think once the General Assembly heard that motivated them to come up with this bill and change it, amend it the way they did.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
And then the Department of Ed is going to seek a waiver. Now, whether they'll get it, as George said, who knows?
And Eric, the information I have says it does apply to graduation classes of 2022, 23, and 24.
Okay, thank you.
And
Okay,
then George,
anything for-
if George, could you go over the information that you heard about the budget so that the committee members know?
Yeah. The other key bill that we're all focused on is the one that we've talked about before, and that, of course, is House Bill 1. It's the replacement for the former House Bill 305, the so-called Cuff-Patterson bill, which now has picked up 2 new sponsors in the Ohio House. It's continuing to undergo hearings in the House in the House committee process. There has been no comparable Senate legislation introduced yet, thus no hearings yet. There is an expectation that if they can work it out, that this amendment or this bill would be included in the House, in the budget bill, House Bill 110. There is anticipated to be a substitute version of House Bill 1 available in the near future. A key question that everybody is looking at right now, of course, is the total cost of House Bill 1. The estimated cost is approximately $2 billion, top of about $8 billion the state currently spends on public education. At one time, they thought that perhaps the bill could be phased in over a 6-year period. There is now some discussion that they might shorten that phase-in period to 4 or perhaps even 2 years. The question, of course, is where do you come up with the additional $2 billion? One idea I heard, but it was only one concept, was that they might look at the $550 million that the DeWine administration got in the previous budget for what they call wraparound wellness services. That might be a source of potential funding in the future as well. Nevertheless, we'll keep a close eye on it. I know we're talking to our legislators about that. And as soon as we get any hard numbers or conditions that we can apply to CPS, we'll certainly make that information available to Jen as well. Any questions at this point?
Yes, Ms. Bowers.
Yes, thank you for that information. Do you, with that information regarding replacing it or redirecting the wraparound wellness dollars, do you think that will not allow those wellness dollars to be there and be replaced with the $2 billion? Would it take it away?
Well, the DeWine administration, I believe, has offered or proposed an additional $100 million to the prior $550 million. And that's just one source that they're looking at right now. They're looking at other sources as well. As an example, and Eric will know this probably better than I would, the Legislative Service Commission, when they came up with their projected revenue for the state of Ohio for the next 2 years, actually came up with a higher number than what the DeWine administration came up with, in large part because their numbers are more current. So there could be additional funds available already through the budget process that they're not looking at. So it's a moving target, but it's going to be a hot item, obviously, for the next 3.5 to 4 months. We'll keep a close eye on it. And I guess one question for CPS is to think about is, if possible, would they like to have this accepted in a current budget, a 2-year cycle, or 4-year, or even a 6-year cycle? Just something to think about.
Okay, any other questions? Any other comments, Mr. Glover or Mr. Kearney?
Yeah, I have one other question. I wanted to, can you hear me? What is the problem today? At any rate, we need to send out some testimony on some of these. Is this the committee we go through, or should we go through Krista, or how do you want that handled, or Dan?
Which in particular? Which on one?
Like for Representative Ingram's bill, or for House Bill 1, or what were the other ones that we talked about, George? There were a couple of other ones that we were.
Representative Brinkman's bill, House Bill 117.
Yeah, 117. There's just, from time to time we need to weigh in. And so is that something, do we go to administration or do we go to the board?
I would go to the administration first.
Mhm.
And let the administration make the recommendation to the board. And if there's a delay, I think that, the administration would just advise that it was, expedient to give you the go-ahead to testify. So I would say, and Ms. Dowers is agreeing with me, that go to administration first.
Okay. Okay.
Krista and Dan.
Yeah.
Figured it out, yeah.
Right, then Kristen, Dan, and Laura, and Jen would all be involved.
Okay.
Madam Chairperson, can I add one more issue?
Yes, go ahead.
One other issue we're keeping a close eye on is the whole broadband issue and any kind of state funding that could be available to sustain that going forward. One thing that we all know is that we have seen a very real digital divide occur over the last year, not just urban, but rural as well. So I know there's been some ongoing discussions between Butler Tech and CPS, and we'll keep a close eye on that issue because it's an issue that the Ohio General Assembly has finally acknowledged and is beginning to apply some funding toward that as well.
Yes, appreciate that.
And two bills to keep an eye on would be House Bill 2, now which has passed the House and now going through the Senate. And then the Senate version is Senate Bill 8, but the key bill is House Bill 2 at this point.
Now, what is House Bill?
House Bill 2.
We don't have,
What is it?
yeah, what is it?
It's a broadband bill that provides.
It's not on the report.
Broadband bill, okay. No, that makes all kinds of sense.
Yep.
Yes, I know I have a home in northern Ohio on an island, and that's a big issue up there.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when I have to do Zoom meetings remotely.
Eric, we need to talk about House Bill 117. I know we represent with Representative Brinkman, the territorial transfer bill or not.
Yeah, we talked about it briefly earlier. You want to talk about it further, or?
No, but I know.
Can you review that? I remember we spoke about it, and there's a little summary, but just kind of give us, an update.
Sorry?
Oh, okay. So that bill is if schools transfer property, like if CPS wanted to sell property or I guess, yeah, selling property is the only thing that you would do. So an adjoining school district could file a petition together showing a map if they abut that school district, and do a proposal to get that piece of property. And there are certain rules if it involves more than one county. So I'm not exactly sure what he's like the motivation behind it, but that's the concern. I don't know if CPS is thinking about transferring or selling any property right now, or if that's something that we're doing. But I know that, in general, it is. I think Dan or Krista told us that the administration is in favor of.
Eric, I can provide some background on that. There were
They
several
would not be
households.
in favor of?
Yes, not in favor. So George has some background.
Because-
Yeah, Representative Brinkman reached out to me last year in an effort to try to resolve this. But simply stated, there were several households that wanted to, I believe, leave CPS, join the Indian Hill School District in his state legislative district, and it did not occur. And I think that was the background or the stimulus for this bill. And at this point, he's the only sponsor, and there have been no hearings scheduled at this point.
Okay. Yeah, it doesn't seem to be getting traction. That just seems like a Pandora's box. Okay, anything, yeah, I can see why the administration would not favor this. I would agree with the administration personally.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Would you, Ms. Ballard?
Yes.
Yes, I would support the administration on this testimony. So anything else?
Other than the fact it's a very active time in Columbus right now.
You're in Columbus?
No, I just said it's a very active time in the Ohio General Assembly right now, as you might imagine.
Well, you guys are doing a great job for us, so thank you very much. Thanks for taking the time. We appreciate it. We look forward to hearing from you again. Thursday?
Oh, yeah, that's right.
As long as I can get broadband up in northern Ohio, because I'm going to be on spring break up there.
I didn't think board members were allowed spring break. No?
I don't think we are either, but I'm going to play hooky.
Thank you.
Okay, gentlemen.
Thanks, guys.
Take care. Thank you.
Okay, next up, we have Jessica Shelly giving us an update on nutrition.
Yeah, so I wasn't really sure what you needed me to give you in terms of information, so I'm going to also answer any questions you might have. I did send a really quick 5-slide PowerPoint just to go over some of the highlights that have happened this last year. COVID has been challenging, but it's also given us a lot of silver linings, and I couldn't be prouder of my team and the work that they have done here to make sure that our community needed to be fed during this whole time.
I'll get it to you, Bob. I'm sorry.
Okay. No, it's okay.
Midland has it, but I'll get it to you. Go ahead, Jessica. We'll get it up in a minute.
So, well, the first slide has a lot of information on it, so I'm just going to go ahead and really quickly. But you have it in front of you, though, don't you? Is that okay if we go ahead? Or?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. So the data points I have for you kind of go over how many meals we actually were able to serve from March of 2020 to March of 2021, and that was about 3.4 million meals. And that seems like a really wonderful number. Unfortunately, we usually serve about 6 million meals each school year. That's about half what we usually do in a year's time. But considering the obstacles that we were up against when COVID first hit, our ability to quickly pivot and turn around and open food hubs across the city, and then continue to expand them to the point where we were working with several different other organizations in our community to ensure that no CPS student was more than 1 mile walking distance from a food hub available through either our CPS schools or one of our community partners. So we really made sure that all of our students were continuing to be able to receive nutritious meals during this time of COVID. We also were awarded $1.5 million in grant money, and that's outside of the CARES COVID Act. That's actually grant money that we received from No Kid Hungry, Children's Hunger Alliance, Harvard Education, through their equipment grants. We were able to secure some funding to really help us in our endeavors to make sure we were continuing to move forward. We also had a wonderful situation where, silver lining, a lot of the restaurants were closed. And that meant that a lot of the farmers had produced produce and items for these restaurants that was no longer able to be used. So it was offered to CPS at a much discounted price. We were able to secure and provide our kiddos with local fresh produce that supported many of our Ohio farmers, and we actually had almost $1.7 million just in this March to March timeframe of local purchases. So we were really proud of the fact that we were able to support that. All 341 of our employees continue to serve and work for our school district during the time that we were closed and into this year, and we are really proud of our accomplishments. Next slide. So I know we were talking a little bit earlier in this week about what's in our meal packs. And in our meal packs are, when we were going out, was a whole week's worth of meals. So not only was it 5 breakfasts and 5 lunch for learning days, we also were providing weekend packs. There were snack packs. And then also at our elementary sites, we were able to continue our fresh fruit and vegetable grant program to provide our youngsters with additional fresh produce each week. The reason people sometimes ask us why we use the weekend fuel packs, so they didn't really have the feel of a regular meal. It wasn't as robust as we have our Asian chicken and rice and whole grain rolls and chicken patty sandwiches and such. But we were listening to feedback from our families, and they were telling us that it's very hard for them to store all the food we were purchasing for them in the refrigerator, or all of it in their freezer. So we really tried to diversify what we were offering to our families so they would have room to put items both in their pantry, in their freezer, in their refrigerator without it overwhelming any of their ability to hold all the items we were offering for them. The next slide. So I love this picture because it has all the great stuff we were able to offer to our families. And we really tried to be super creative. And we had extra opportunity and funding to go out and purchase produce boxes for our families. We really took advantage of that. It included a whole variety of fresh produce and also recipes from the actual farmers themselves of their crops. And we really want to make that connection for our families to see where the produce came from that they were receiving, that it was a local farmer that they were receiving coming into their home. So we really tried to make sure that while we were still conscientious of the shelf stable and the diversity of items, that we were also offering our fresh produce that we usually offer during our school year. Next slide, please. And this is just some of the comments that came back from our community members. We were really very, very thankful for their partnership, but these kinds of kudos are what kept us kind of going during some of the really challenging times. But the fact that they were able to recognize us as being a true community partner and collaborating with a lot of our local institutions to make sure that our farmers and our economy was supported, we really tried to shift our purpose and our focus to purchasing items that were Ohio proud. So if it was a manufacturer in Ohio, we made sure that they were top priority for us to secure meals. And in fact, our weekend fuel packs that you'll find in our meal packs are from a company right outside of Columbus called Champion. And we have pretty much put them on the map. They weren't doing very much until we found them and we said, hey, how would you like to give us about 50,000 meals a week? They were like, so that was really exciting. And then if you go to the next slide, please. Over spring break, one of the great things of this weird quasi-USDA time is they've extended so many different waivers to school districts to do things we're normally never allowed to do. And we have taken full advantage of every waiver they've given us in terms of being able to offer meals for weekends, offering meals all at one time, non-congregate feeding, parent pickup, guardian pickup. We've just done it all. And one of the great things has been meals over breaks. So for winter break, we were able to provide a large box of meals to provide for 14 days, and we're doing the same thing for spring break. And again, we found a local company up in northern Ohio that's actually sourcing for us a box of 7 days worth of meals, so 7 lunches and 7 breakfasts, and we're doing this distribution in conjunction with Free Store Food Bank. So Free Store Food Bank usually hands out their meal boxes to their families the 4th Wednesday of every month at their Tennessee Avenue location, and they are allowing us to come and also set up a tent next to them. So when families come through to get their box from Free Store Food Bank, we can also say how many children in your household, and we can give them a large 14 meal box to them as well as their Free Store Food Bank box. So those community partnerships have really been invaluable for us during this time, and it's been a true honor to collaborate with many of them. And that's all I had. And even, one last thing that was really exciting. So this just came to me today. I walked back into my office from cleaning out at schools, helping them plan to come back for the 5-day-week meals. And we have received a Child Nutrition Award from Children's Hunger Alliance in recognition of all we have done this last year for the pandemic. So I'm going to leave this here for the board office for you guys to put in your board, because we couldn't have done it without the support of the administration and Superintendent Mitchell, and of course the board, really making sure that we had everything we needed to move forward and help our communities. So I'm going to leave this here.
Thank you.
Back to the board office.
Now, that's a great recap. Any questions, Ms. Bowers?
Yes, thank you for your presentation. But the question I do have, well, let me tell you this. I want to acknowledge community partners who were pleased about the flexibility of the USDA, because I knew people who were going around getting packages for families because parents couldn't, and they were doing lots of drive pickups, pickups and go. So I do know partners in the community who are happy about that. The question I do have is, when we are in 5-day a week, I know that we'll have in person, but those people that are at home that are not in the building, how would this still work for them?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I'm going to answer that with 2 different parts. And the first one is about our meal program. So we will still be able to provide meals to any family who elects to stay 100% remote. But the caveat is, because we've opened up 5 days a week, that school site becomes something called closed enrolled. And so we are only able to serve meals out to students who are present in school that day. However, we still have our virtual high school, our CPA, that will be able to offer the 7-day meal boxes to anybody, not just CPS students, but CPS students and their families. They can still come and get a meal box every day from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. on Wednesdays. So that will still be available for our remote families.
So they'll have to get transportation to come down to CDA.
That will be the one thing that is not going to be as as convenient as it has been to have them at all of our school sites, but unfortunately the way that the code is written is that we have to make sure that we have availability to students in the schools. But in that same vein, the USDA has also put out something called Pandemic EBT. And it is an extra amount of money that's loaded onto either an existing SNAP card or a SNAP card that's mailed to any family whose student is 100% virtual. And they receive a certain allotment, and for this time it's $6.82 a day for the student that is in virtual learning that will be loaded to them. And that is to help in lieu of a school meal if they're not able to access it. So that will be available to all of our families that qualify for free and reduced meals or are enrolled in a community eligibility provision school.
Okay, so the families will have both. Because they have both?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. One, they don't have to drive $6 is just for lunch, obviously, but it's not like the
Oh, no, that's lunch and breakfast. We get a very, very small reimbursement amount.
Okay.
And, but that's the total reimbursement for a free breakfast and a free lunch each day that we provided to the school district to provide meals for families.
Okay.
But instead of us getting it, they're going to give it directly to the families.
Okay.
And they can still come and get meals in addition to, and we would encourage that.
Right.
We're also still working with our community partners. So right now, every Wednesday, we have CRC and different community learning center groups that are putting together virtual learning pods that come and get meals from us every single week. And we'll still be available for them to pick up meals for students who are 100% remote learning and in their care during the work and school day.
Okay, so that partnership will remain. So a family may not have to go to CDA if they can go to the rec.
If their child's enrolled in the rec center.
Okay, right. If they've been utilizing the capacity, they can go there and still. Okay, so that makes sense. Thanks, that's great.
Okay. Anything else?
No, that was it. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Very good information. Okay. Next, we have Susan Bunte, Student Code of Conduct and Discipline. And I know that this is kind of a new report that we requested. So before we have people participate, it would be a good idea for the committee to review this data and see if this is what we're looking for.
Right.
Okay.
precisely. So I hope we set the deck up. We'll see. So Rob is going to pull it up for us. So thank you, Rob, for doing that. So as you all may remember, the Student Code of Conduct is a piece of the larger Student Support Guide. And every year we bring this to the board for your approval. So we typically do that in the June-ish kind of meeting before we recess for the next school year. Next slide, please. So we are very proud of our student support guide and specifically the code of conduct. If you can go to the next slide, Rob, thanks. We've received national recognition. Is it stuck?
It's on its own page.
It's okay. It's tired. I don't even see the little wheel things. We've received national recognition, and so we know we always have room to improve, certainly, but our code of conduct really emphasizes the positive behavior support. We recognize that we reduce inappropriate behaviors by teaching and acknowledging appropriate ones. And so this is something that we have done for the last few years. The board has, so thank you very much, supported the development of the Positive School Culture Department. So you all know Dr. Carrie Bunger, who was the first and is the first director of that department and guides the work of our school social workers. So on the next slide, you can see the members of our discipline committee. And we are soon going to be adding some of our students from Speak Up, Speak Out, so we are very excited about that addition. And although we have parents on the team who are staff members of CPS students, we are also going to invite solely parents whose main role in our district is that of parents. So these folks devote a lot of time. They meet on a monthly basis to review the data and to take a look at where we are as a district. So on the next slide, you can see that as they've been working through the Code of Conduct edits for the 2021 school year, so this current school year, they focused on three main themes. So to decriminalize, as we did last year as well, some of the offenses and the terminology that is used for those offenses, to really clarify language so that we are looking at different aspects of the code of conduct with consistency across our district, and then adding language around remote learning and distance learning, because we have a feeling that some segment of our student population will continue in a distance learning format going forward. On the next slide, we will take a moment to just consider things that we are proposing that we bring to this committee on a quarterly basis. So one of the ways that we look at the data is by month. So beginning in August, we will take a look and bring this information to you of our office discipline referrals, our exclusionary consequences, and then the top 5 incidents per month. And I have examples to show you of all of this information, and then you all are welcome to provide feedback to say this is what we want or this is not what we want, can we change it in the following ways. We're also going to disaggregate that data for you, not only by race, but by student disability status and by our English learners. Our English learners, I don't have an example for you today because we're still in progress of the way that we pull that information from behind the scenes. Next slide, please. So what you're going to see next is an example of a broad level view of what that office discipline referral data looks like. So the top line is last year's data, which looks markedly different than this year's data. So you have what we call ODRs, or office discipline referrals. So that's that first big broad line. And then the second grouping underneath that are exclusionary consequences. So those are those consequences that students receive that take them out of the classroom environment. So they could be students who are assigned for the day or part of a day to the alternate learning center, what we used to call ISS, but we have really shifted how we work that, or students who go to A2E or A2S. Next slide, please. So the other report that we would like to bring to you all for your review is what we call top 5 incidents. So what are the top 5 challenges in terms of behavior coding are we facing during this time? Interestingly enough, the ones that we are facing right now are those deeply impacted by remote and distance learning. So typically, cheating and plagiarism is not in our top 5, but because we are in a different way of accessing school, this one has risen to the top, and then you can see the other ones, so disruptive behavior, profanity, inappropriate communication, and then fighting. So, and those last 2 are tied for 4th place. That's the reason that we have, and that completes the 5. So that top 5 incidents, I think, is really helpful. And then the last way that we would look at it is by doing a disaggregated deep dive by demographic. So this is by percentage of enrollment. So African American students make up 61% of our student population. They have 66% of the office, 68, I apologize, 68% of the office referrals. And you can go down there accordingly. So students who are white Caucasian, 22.1%, they make up 22% of the office referrals. Our Latinx students, and then you can see right now, this is the data that I'm watching very carefully, is students with disabilities who have 19.5% of our enrollment, but right now are comprising 31% of our office referrals. So that's the way that we are proposing that we take a look at the different ways that we can disaggregate data. So starting at that big broad view of office referrals, exclusionary consequences, and then kind of diving down into top 5 incidents, and then disaggregating by demographic. So, and we also are able to provide any other ways that you want to take a look at it. So this concludes our suggested format going forward.
Ms. Ballard.
Yes, thank you. I just want to call you Deputy Superintendent. Assistant Superintendent Barnes.
Yes, ma'am.
So when we talked about the exclusionary numbers in that bottom graph,
Yes.
Because A to S and A to E is to me so different from ALC, which I heard you use ISS
Yes.
instead of ALC.
It's the other way around. So it's ALC instead of ISS. You have it.
Right.
Yes.
So the ALC, that's the group I'm thinking that should be different than A to S, because to me those are larger
Yep.
referrals. Maybe split that up, because
Yep.
I think there's more work that we need to dwell down in on how we utilize ALC, because I still think we're utilizing it as ISS. We gave it a different name. We slapped the lipstick on the pig, but it's still a pig.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I'm concerned about also.
Okay. So we can pull those apart. Like I could do ALC numbers, pull apart, yes.
Okay. Yes.
Yes, so, my apologies. I was logged into the
Welcome, Ryan.
Google Teams, and I'm like, wait a minute. And then just as I was like 4:01, I get that message from Phyllis. I'm like, oh. So, glad to be here. And I just totally forgot, because we had the other meeting here in person, and I just spaced it. This whole area, I've always felt like kind of an outsider on this. Because, I think Pam is a professional, deals with a lot of this stuff, and then other people have been around a long time. And I think I'm much more like the general public. When I hear positive school culture, it's like, oh, well, we have activities and fun things going. We work to celebrate holidays that are reflective of the diversity of our population. And I think it's been watered down into these creative words, and it's kind of hard to tell exactly what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So while I totally get that you want to make it as positive as possible, I think it can be very confusing to hear that, positive school culture, and then have this. Sometimes you just have to call discipline or something.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's positive school culture and discipline. But as it relates to this, then I think the second question is, what are the things that are here versus something where an SRO would be called in? Mm-hmm. And how do we not put those things together to be looking crossways, to be like, did any of these get reported over this way? Could they have been done better this way? Because I think that is an area that we're obviously going to be
Yeah.
moving toward. So is there just a total bucket versus separating these out, a way that we could look at kind of all these things in aggregate and then break them apart? Because we look at these things based on those demographics, and we look at these things based on the demographics. Are there similarities? And then again, do they at all talk to each other? And how does one go to the one versus the other, kind of the decision matrix of how that actually happens? So for me, I totally get it, but I like the update today, and I think it's great, and you guys are best in class. I truly believe there's very little that we could offer up that you wouldn't already say, no, that's what we want to. But I think the question is, how do we make it a little bit more easy to understand to people who are not in the weeds of this all day, every day, when we talk about this, and then perhaps make it where it's more comprehensive in the entire category?
So, okay. I was going to respond. I can wait though.
Yeah. I have a couple of comments. I know that a few years ago, there was an Inquirer article, and it really caught the board off guard because the dive was into by school. And there were some major discrepancies between how discipline was, was conferred in particularly one school versus all the others. So I do think it would be helpful to have it disaggregated by school so that the board would know if,
What the issue is.
yeah, are there issues?
Right.
And the explanation was that this principle was a letter of the law kind of principle. And if that was caught earlier, maybe that principle could have been counseled. You know what I mean? And we kind of looked stupid because the board had no idea. No idea. So I would really, I really think it's important that we see it by school too. And also what we don't see here are arrests. And I think that would be very helpful too. And what they're arrested for, of course, if they bring a firearm to school, I mean, that's federal law. You have to, they're out. But, I think that, from what I'm hearing about the SROs, that, the students want to have a relationship with them. It's a good thing if there are relationships, but that would be certainly a way to examine, not just what's going on at individual schools, but if some SROs are heavier handed and what the offenses are for, I know that another issue, I was on the discipline committee way back when, I think Eileen Cooper-Reed and I were both on it, and it looks like it's being addressed in discipline committee now, but it's the subjectivity of the discipline and being more specific in the code of conduct, Yes.
Yeah, I agree with Chairperson Bates with the schools. I agree because I saw that article years ago, but knowing that different school dynamics are all different, and sometimes the way we respond and trying to get a more unified continuum, I think is key. But to Brian's point, Brian's point, understanding positive school culture and the dynamics that you're promoting, this is the dynamic and this is the culture of our school to help, delineate or lessen some of those discipline things. That's the whole idea, is that if the school is presenting in this strength-based focus, and this is how we operate in our school building, it would decrease the discipline over here. And I still want to call it PBIS, but I know I shouldn't say that. It's positive school culture.
That's part of it, though.
Yeah, so, but the idea is to promote the strengths to help decrease the negative, which is why it's called, which is why that is. So I think I would agree with you about school, because the SROs look different in different schools, and the reasons for them to be pulled into situations could be eliminated earlier in ALC or with other interventions through positive support, positive school culture, that they would not be involved. And so I think that is all together. So,
One more.
Yes.
So, I absolutely think we should be looking at this through the lens of race. Are there other demographics, though, that we should also look at as well? I think there's a variety of factors that could come into play. And are there some things underneath that we could diagnose? And has there been any work done to any of the other demographics that might allow us to then put other interventions or support systems or whatever in place?
So in the past, we've done, so we're involved right now in a disproportionality work along with Princeton Northwest and the Georgetown University, and not because we had to, but because we recognize it's something where we want to grow, learn, and get better. And so as part of that work through Georgetown, and we're participating along with the magistrates of Cincinnati and JFS and Legal Aid. It's a full wraparound project. Part of the work that we've been doing is we have been paying attention to race, but we've also been paying attention to gender, and we've been paying attention to students with disabilities. Because a lot of times, what we've seen across data nationally is it's Black males with disabilities. And so, who have a higher rate of referrals and then can get in a negative cycle in terms of discipline. And so how do we wrap support around those young people? And what do we do in not only wrapping support, but how do we break that at the school level so that we are not over-referring certain types of youngsters in that process?
And just to follow up, so totally get like that's a little deeper, but could it be that who are maybe in single parent homes in poverty, that, there was this great man who led this young men's support organization, and he truly believed that it was, yes, race played a piece, yes, maybe their gender, but as he looked through this organization, I forget what the name of it was, an override, but he was actually a retired police officer that started this, but he said 9 times out of 10, there was not a male figure, so identifying somebody in the community that could mentor very specifically. Poverty was, so it's like, what other resources do they need to just be able to survive at home? And so, are those potentially something that could be somehow assessed?
Yeah.
We track that at all?
So we don't, poverty is hard for us because of the way that, but that's not something that we're supposed to know about our students. And so it's really hard to pull that data. Yeah, it's because of confidentiality. So I'm just being as transparent as I can. It's not that I don't want to provide it for you, I would. I mean, I can take a look and see if there's a way that we can get to it.
Yes.
And just to reiterate, in addition to that, because I know you had, did I see female or gender up there? So you're going to make an, okay.
We can.
But I also want to note to Ryan, because there are a lot of students who the school is not aware of that may have a mental illness that the school wouldn't have that information about either. So we couldn't track that as a school district. But that would also play a part into some of the information, like we were talking about single parent homes. But we couldn't grasp that information unless the family divulged it. Yeah. So, I mean, that's a barrier.
Yes.
May I summarize to make sure that I have it accurately captured? Okay, so for next time, and when we present the data for the end of the year, we'll try and make these corrections. I appreciate your flexibility and working through this with us until we get it exactly for what you all need. So we'll split apart ALC data from ADE-8S or out-of-school exclusionary data. So in-school exclusion versus out-of-school exclusion. We will also add.
Can you just in-school exclusion, out-of-school is like?
Yeah, no.
Or not
Good. So, yeah. So we look at it as lost instructional time. So how, like, we track it by minute. So how many minutes of instructional time have we lost for this grouping of students? And so if you look at in-school exclusionary consequences, that's when students have been removed from their classroom and reassigned to an alternative learning center within the building, where we've done a lot of training over the last 18 months for our folks who run those classroom environments on what that should look like. Out of school exclusion is they are physically no longer within the school walls. They're either at AP, A to S, or sometimes they're at home. So, I think that's a good split. So what does it look like? How are we using, ideally, we don't want to exclude anyone from instruction. But if we are excluding students, then we would prefer that they still be in their home school. So I think that's a good call out because we could track that for sure. And then part of that exclusionary could be possible arrests and how often SROs are called in. So that would be additional information. And that information by school, so that we can take a look at possibly early warning signs. One of you mentioned having that high-level district view and then drilling down, so we certainly can do that. And then paying attention to any other demographics that we can provide, including gender. Is that a good capture? Okay.
And then just one last question as it relates to the arrests.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a report done, so if there is an arrest by a child,
Mm-hmm.
is there a report done by the SRO? So there's, like, we have data, like which SRO did the arrest, what the cause was, any background information. I was under the impression that the answer was no, and that we couldn't tie arrest to any specific SRO. And I was surprised by that. I just heard that. And so I just was curious as it relates to being able to track to school, but also by SRO.
Mm-hmm. I honestly don't know, so I would have to look into that.
Is there some confidentiality around that?
Mm-hmm.
I knew that there was.
And I think even so I'm just again, as transparently as I can be, so even if there was just one, yes, I think there could be. So if there's like one arrest at a school, I think it's possible to obviously trace that back to who the student was involved. So, but let me see how we can get it, because it might be that we could do district-wide totals or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So this year, our data looks completely different. So this year, it hasn't been as much of a situation. But let me find out.
Well, one possibility is that if we are delving into very sensitive information that's protected by privacy, but it's available to the district, that we go into executive session to discuss that.
Mm-hmm.
If you feel that it's too sensitive, but again, the board should have a handle on what's going on,
Oh, I agree.
and as long as it's permissible, well, if it's, information that's,
Mm-hmm. Now let me see what we have.
to be kept confidential, yeah.
And I can even possibly send a memo just letting you all know what we have in between now and our next meeting, if that would be helpful.
Right, and it's just not to know, it's, to
Oh, sure.
make sure that we're being equitable
With how
we, levy our discipline.
Mm-hmm. Oh, no, I understand.
the numbers are
And I think to that, I was trying to figure out, like, in the context of all this, how does the SRO get trained?
Hmm.
And I think I understood that it was by the police department.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like the check and balance of, if they're going to train to then take care of our kids, we need to make sure that there's not, like, that we're not getting a negative outcome simply because we might have the wrong person there. This is not to say anything negative about anybody who's an SRO, but it seems to me like that would be a necessary check and balance. Like, I think publicly, if somebody's arrested, you can pull the report. And I feel like we should have a report, even if it's not publicly available, if it's confidentiality and all this stuff, but for tracking to ensure there's equity and fairness in how each individual is being treated.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Ms. Howard.
You're right, but I think juvenile brings up a different thing.
Mhm.
You're right with adults. Juveniles is very different because they're minors.
Mhm.
But unless they're 18 in high school. The other question that I have is, didn't we have training for our security team?
Mhm.
Is there any type of, for specific reasons, but it would be nice, just based on committee member Messer's comment, that it would be nice to have some type of scale down from the police and then bring it up from our staff to meet right here in regards to how we interact with our youth. I think that's a great idea, because I knew that our security people had some training.
So our security staff, they're trained in OPATA, which is the Ohio Peace Officer Training, and they're also trained in crisis prevention, which is same techniques used in de-escalation.
Right.
So they receive both of those trainings in order for them to be able to be security guards in our schools.
And I would imagine that if that happened and that issue wasn't resolved, in a whole different layer is the SRO,
Correct.
right? Which is
Correct.
might sometimes be a concern. Okay.
I have a question. This goes back to when O.C. Davis was on the board, and he had a very specific complaint that was brought to him that was ongoing, and that there was drug dealing at the corner of Rockdale and Reading Road, right in front of our school. Is that the SRO's responsibility, or how does that carry over into the community? Or is it the community officer that's involved in those kinds of issues? Do we know, or is there interaction between those that are handling issues such as this?
So I'll go back and put on my principal hat for just a minute. So I know that when those type of incidents have occurred in the past, I can check to see what policy procedure is now, is that folks we called our SROs and alerted them to the situation, and then the SRO would work directly with the CPD because a lot of times it was happening not during school hours, and so then they kept each other informed. So, but I can check.
That's another important reason to have the SROs, not just, as presence in the schools, but as a liaison to the community. And since our kids haven't been in school, we've forgotten about, the mass shootings. That's been a non-issue because kids haven't been in school, but that's certainly another reason to have SROs there who have relationships with kids that kids can go to when they know that something's amiss with other students. Okay, anything else on discipline? Thank you. And COVID-19 pandemic, and I don't expect you to go over everything you're going to go over in the meeting, so we don't want to hear it twice.
You don't want to hear it twice?
Well, I don't want to hear it twice. I'm just kidding.
We like you, but no.
So the highlights are, we really haven't had a whole lot of updates since the last presentation. We're still at about where we were. Positivity rate has come down a little bit. On our school measures, we're still about the same where we are. We have 8 in-school transmissions. Our safety protocol implementation did go up slightly last week, so we monitor that from week to week. We do have still in the planning stages the surveillance testing, which will be focused on high school students initially, and so Susan and I are working with Children's and some other partners to be able to get that in place.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Mitchell.
There's one, we finished first. What, can you help explain?
Yes.
I'm sure there's the rest of the story.
Yes, there is.
And I thought, I'm going to ask that tonight so I can, effectively answer that when I get posed that question.
Sure, yes. So there was an article last week that pointed out that Cincinnati Public Schools have the most student cases in the state. We are the largest school district that has been open for in-person learning in the state. Columbus and Cleveland both just very recently opened. And so you have different levels of reporting when students are completely on remote learning.
And
and the last thing I'll say about that is If you look at, for example, Hamilton County, if you look at our cases as a ratio to the number of students we have, we're actually the third lowest.
And that's what I was just going to interject. It isn't necessarily our students that were driving us to be number one. It's the combination of the students plus the staff.
Yeah.
And so, as you may remember, we did testing of our staff under Test and Protect. And so we identified many, many staff members who were asymptomatic, who never would have realized they had COVID except for that testing. And we were, I think, one of the only school districts in the state that did that. And as a result, it drove up our numbers. So it's a good bad. So it looks bad on the story that splashes across the Columbus Dispatch, but at the same time, we know the story behind it, and it's that we tested our staff.
Is there any way to include that in tonight's update? I mean, since it has been raised, I wonder if it could at least be something just spoken to say, look, you may have heard this. I think it's great. And of course, we have 36,000 kids. We're probably going to have more than a district that has 300. The ratio makes us the third lowest. And we've heard this from, I don't even think Julie Sellers necessarily understood it when she sent an email to the board. I think it would just help everybody have a common understanding. Yeah.
Ask her, and then if we ask, will you say something about it, Sarah?
Okay.
Yeah, and I think I need to go back and pull up the article too, but we were not the highest students. Was it?
I think we were.
I think we were, but you can't count the number.
That's right.
We have more students.
Right.
And I think this is
right.
one of those too, like when we get we had a couple messages to the board.
Mm-hmm.
This is one that would be helpful to have a standard, Carolyn's going to reply on top of the board to say, thank you. On the surface, yes, I can understand your concern. However, this is a ratio is what we should be looking at because no other district has 36,000 kids that was open.
Yeah.
Our ratio makes us one of the bottom three.
Yeah.
And I think that would just be like, So thank you. I feel very much smarter on this one than I was just trying to figure out how to answer that.
Yeah, we weren't the highest in student cases.
We weren't?
No. So we had, our student cases are 449. Lakota has 704.
Okay.
Hilliard has 674. It's our
The combination
staff
of the two.
cases. So they added both numbers together.
Right.
They added staff plus students.
Okay.
So because of our testing for asymptomatic, so because of the testing for asymptomatics, it really pumped us up. And the other piece of it too is we've done a lot of testing with students. So we are one of the few districts that test our students in schools. And as a result, that's pushed that up. But yeah, we are not the highest student cases. Total, we have the highest. Staff plus students combined.
So actually, the testing, even though it showed more positives, resulted in quarantines, which probably kept us safer in the long run.
Mm-hmm. And there are plenty of schools that have more students than us.
Mm-hmm. Oh, a lot
There are
more.
plenty of schools out here that have more students than us.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right, the combination of the two.
It's the, yeah. Oh, no, you're welcome. Because I poured over that, so that's.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else? Well, anything for the order, anything else you would like to see?
If we've had the conversation about the Young Activist Coalition presented to SAC, and then I think when we moved it over here, I'd love to have that data come to us.
What data?
What they presented to SAC, so that it was here in safety, and officially kind of entered, and then I think to decide like what is our path to then, I think there's a variety of steps to help us figure out what does the future of the SROs, and I feel like we've got things happening all out here. my opinion is we've got to bring everything somewhere. I don't care where it is, but if it's here, I'd love to have that presentation to this committee so that we can hear what they have at SAC.
Now, I strongly disagree with you, and I talked to Carolyn about this earlier. Once we open up that, we don't have a process to determine who gets to have presentations. So if we let the young activists, how do we say no to the remote-only parents? How do we say no to, on and on and on and on. We have to use a process to determine who comes before our committee as far as constituent groups, or else we're going to be, how can we say no to anybody else? Number one. Number two, I thought we also do have a process for hearing the young activists, the group that Laura brought to the last meeting, all the groups, and that's when we have our quarterly or bi-monthly, I forget how we decided to do that, discipline updates, and we are going to invite community members to give input at that time. So that's the process that we agreed on as a committee. But right now, I'm not going, if next year you're chair of the committee, but right now we don't have a process to allow presentations by individual groups without setting a precedent.
So board members can't ask for a presentation?
Okay.
We have, no, well, if it's on our work plan, if it's related to our work plan, we can. But what we did do is ask the administration to bring their data to us, correct? And to contact Council of Great City Schools and to verify, and I think everybody but this committee has heard their data, to verify the data that is out there. Because, it's, commendable that a group of students put together data, but how do we know the data is correct? So that is, that was an assignment we gave to the administration.
Before you respond,
Yes.
I don't know if I agree that SAC, if it's an alignment with SAC committee work plan, then they come. If they MBC my email, they come. And that's what, and I think that has happened in other committees also. If somebody wants to present, but I do think that we talked about how to merge the two groups and then have them come together to have dialogue.
Right.
We talked about that in this committee,
Right.
The young activists and the speak up, speak out.
And others. It's not just limited to those two.
Well, right, but just have a dialogue. But I was hoping to merge those because some of just to have a dialogue on how do we move forward with some of the concerns. But I also knew that I was going to ask you, is there any way to invite them to that committee that you have?
Yeah, so they're going to participate on Speak Up, Speak Out, because that is a CPS sanctioned
Okay,
group,
all right.
is that as a part of the collaborative, so individuals from that group will be invited to participate on the discipline committee starting in August. So, but if anybody else asked to be a part of that group, they couldn't, like a representative couldn't be on that from young activists. So I would have to find out about that because right now that's not a CPS
It's not open
sanctioned.
to just community, it's just open to who already is involved. But I know we were trying to figure out how to merge the two or try to have a discussion. That was what I was thinking we were going to have here too. Because it came to SAC and it's not up under SAC.
Yeah.
And it's fine to have information, but there's nothing.
My opinion is we have to get a work plan. I think we have out there that there's a question on what do we do with SROs? What's the new world for SROs? Does it need to change at all? So somebody has to say, here's the plan. And I don't know that we can get there without having some data. And my opinion is, just like we allowed a group of parents to come in and present, talk about their opinions on early start time, that wasn't a CPS group. We brought them in, they were able to give their opinions, and it informed, and then there was work that started. I appreciate that there's a group. Now, maybe the approach has not always been the most positive, et cetera, but I do believe that there's at least some data that I'd be interested in. Then we have a group, the advisory group called, I always forget, that Laura.
Speak up, speak up.
Speak up, speak up. So we have that group, but I don't know that they have this as a primary charter, part of their charter, that this was a specific part of what they were going to do. So maybe we bring them into this meeting as well to also hear young activists. But then I think we have to think through, all right, what is the work? And my opinion is, much like we did for the anti-racism policy, we said, look, we're not the experts. So we put together a working group of a variety of stakeholders who then worked together to craft something that brought us in.
Right.
And so I think that the potential is there for us to do something similar with this. Otherwise, I feel like we're just going to be spinning without a work plan.
Yeah.
And, you know,
work plan for
a project plan for how we're going to get from current state to whatever future state is with SROs. We're just going to keep coming up and coming up and coming up and coming up.
A path forward.
I want to know what's the path forward. What's the first step through the 15th step? And part of it is, I think, is first you got to do kind of the fact finding and understanding what work has been done. And I don't treat the Young Activist Coalition any different than I would that outside group that came with early start time. I'd love to officially hear what they have to say versus like the 2-minute comments in public. That, you know, I would have gone to that SAC. I didn't know because, you know, it didn't fall under there, so I didn't think to go to that one. But I think bring it in here. Thank you for bringing that to us. Now we have this other group. Great. What's the best thing to kind of get this forward? And I think if the administration, if we help kind of say, we think it would be these 10 stakeholders, maybe you need a couple of parents, maybe you need some students, whatever, all this work can now hand it to this working group like we did for the anti-racism policy. They come back with some suggestions, and then I think we can actually do something with that.
You know, I just talked to Carolyn about this today because she was presented with this request. Actually, they want to speak to the entire board, not just us. So right now it's kind of in her hands because the requests are getting larger, and I do think
so the whole board is going to take the SRO issue.
No,
or do that as a board.
No, the young activists want to be heard by the entire board. We have the SRO issue, and so we are asking for data regarding arrests. So we're asking we asked the administration to bring that back to us. So I want to hear the administration's information first, because I think, this year it's probably zero, I'm thinking.
Well, we could go back and do historical.
Yeah, but that's what I would want to hear. And also, what, as we had already requested, information on SROs and programs across the country through the Council of Great City Schools. So I would rather do the macro look first, and we haven't done that.
Well, so the problem is, time is of the essence on this one. It keeps being brought up and brought up and brought up. And because I can't even speak to what are we doing other than we're waiting on something to come back just on the rest. I want to know, that's a part, but comprehensively, what does it look to kind of do an assessment of total current state, which is not just arrest, in my opinion. It's a look at the whole program, how we got here for a lot of new people. How did this program evolve to what it is today? And then what do we envision for the future? That's very different than waiting on some facts on arrest. And so I would love to at least tee up some work. The teachers union, and I don't criticize them at all for doing a town hall on Saturday.
It was canceled.
Oh, so that was out there, and I was like, oh, well, how does this
It
fit?
was canceled.
And if we can get everybody working, I just don't have time, as I think a lot of us, to just keep hearing something over and over and over without being able to say, all right, here's the process we're going to follow to go from current state to future state. So the
So,
work
yeah.
plan, I think, is important.
So, that's an assignment to the administration to come up with a macro plan.
Mhm.
And the macro data, district-wide and council groups, to see what they have. And then bring it to us.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, thinking about what Ryan said, because even if they do present to the whole board, then will the assignment be given back to the?
It's going to be back there anyway.
Well,
You know what I mean?
we
You
have
to
a process
present.
for that. We
Yeah.
have the process that we established in our work plan. And that is when we do have the discipline data presented to us, that we can have the constituent groups provide input at that time. And that way, we're not giving priority to one over the other. We will have participation by a variety of participant groups, which would give us a broader idea. So we set that process up when we developed our work plan. Yes, Ms.
And
Ballard.
it does make sense, because I was just about to say something. It makes sense.
And Carolyn's gonna get really
She's
mad at me.
gonna get mad. I can't think of what I was going to say.
Okay.
Oh, Brian, this is yours.
Sorry, guys.
It was something. I'll remember it later.